Welcome, students, to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a close, analytical look at one of the absolute oldest, most fiercely debated, and honestly most profound philosophical paradoxes in human history. We're talking about the fundamental challenge of reconciling a supposedly all-knowing, all-powerful God with the undeniable reality of human suffering. Like, how can both exist at the exact same time? It's this massive conceptual puzzle that's kept scholars awake for literally centuries and probably ruined more than a few dinner parties along the way. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our quick roadmap for today's explainer. First, we'll hit the problem of evil. Second, three key philosophers. Third, the inconsistent triad. And finally, Mackey's view on evil. All right, Section 1, the problem of evil. I want to ask you a direct question, and I really want you to keep this in the back of your mind as we go through these concepts today. If God is omnibenevolent, meaning all-loving, and omnipotent, meaning all-powerful, why is there suffering? The core problem here is strictly logical. You see, some argue that they simply cannot believe in God because, theoretically, if a being with infinite power and infinite love actually existed, well, that being would naturally step in and prevent evil and suffering from happening. Yet we look around the world and suffering is everywhere. Moving right along to Section 2, three key philosophers. It's fascinating because these three thinkers make remarkably similar points despite living in vastly different eras. We start way back with Epicurus in ancient Greece, who's actually credited with formulating the very first logical paradox of God and suffering. Fast forward a bit, and 18th century Scottish philosopher David Hume popularized this exact same paradox in his writings on natural religion. And finally, that brings us to 20th century Australian philosopher J.L. Mackie, who took this whole history and built a highly sophisticated, logical defense of atheism. Next up, Section 3, the inconsistent triad. Now, if you're prepping for an exam, listen up, because this terminology is the absolute centerpiece. A triad is simply a group of three things. Pretty straightforward, right? And the word inconsistent means that not all of these things can be correct at the exact same time. They inherently conflict with one another. When you put them together, they create a logical paradox where at least one element absolutely must be false if the others are true. So let's look at the three prongs of this specific triad. Point 1, evil exists. Point 2, God is omnipotent, or all-powerful. And point 3, God is omnibenevolent, or all-loving. Now, as the sources point out, we really can't disagree with point 1. I mean, we know evil exists because we experience it directly in our daily lives, through illness, natural disasters, human cruelty, you name it. Therefore, if point 1 is an undeniable reality, the inconsistency has to lie with point 2 or point 3. And this brilliantly illustrates the logical trap. Consider the first possible outcome. God is not omnipotent. What this means is that because he is all-loving, he wouldn't want humans to suffer, but because they still do, he must simply lack the ultimate power to actually stop it. Alternatively, consider the second outcome. God is not omnibenevolent. In this scenario, God has all the power in the universe to stop the suffering, but because he doesn't step in to stop it, he must not truly care about human suffering. Now, what's really interesting here is how J.L. Mackie pushes this logical problem one step further. Mackie argues that the very definition of the classical religious God requires him to be both all-powerful and all-loving. Therefore, Mackie concludes that if God is either not omnipotent or not omnibenevolent, well then that specific version of God logically cannot exist. The presence of evil for Mackie basically cancels out the existence of the God of classical theism. This brings us to Section 4, Mackie's view on evil. Now, one common argument out there is that we need evil in the world so that we can appreciate the good. You know, the idea that we wouldn't know what good was without experiencing its opposite. Well, Mackie completely rejects this. He argues that evil is just the opposite of good, and we can easily know what is good without ever experiencing evil. He uses a really practical, everyday analogy. Think about it. You know exactly what makes food taste good. You don't actually need to go out and intentionally eat terribly cooked, rotten food just to understand that a fresh, well-prepared meal is delicious. You just know it. Let's quickly summarize how Mackie dismisses two other major religious defenses. First is the defense that suffering builds character, that it makes us better, stronger people. Mackie's rebuttal to this is super direct. If God is truly all-powerful, he'd be able to just make us perfectly moral and strong in the first place. He wouldn't need to use the blunt instrument of human suffering to do his work for him. The second major defense is that evil is simply the result of free will. Mackie's rebuttal here is that the immense scale of evil and suffering in the world is just an unfair price to pay for the privilege of free will. So, what should you take away from all this? We've explored the historical depth of this debate, the precise mechanics of the inconsistent triad, and Mackey's systematic, logical teardown of religious defenses. I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder for your studies. Is free will an unfair price to pay for the reality of suffering, as Mackey suggests? Or does the undeniable existence of evil definitively prove, through the triad, that an all-powerful, all-loving God simply cannot exist? Use your notes, apply the logic, and draw your own philosophical conclusions. Thank you for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep structuring your thoughts, and I'll see you next time.